again, there's not a whole lot of people that are wired that way. Like, give me a bunch of Lego bricks and I'll build, like the Eiffel Tower or something like that, right? Like, so there's people who love that, and that's where they flourish. Then there's like the next class up is that there's a lot of people who like to take something that's already there and make it better, right? And that's a pretty important role for people once your company is a little bit more established, right? Because you want to make sure that your sales are okay, but you want somebody who can take it to the next level, right?
Yeah.
Those are the level uppers. And I think I came to the realization that I really wasn't making an impact on the world. And the legacy for me is that if I can do something to change the way in which people get into roles that they're going to do well in, and companies can hire the people that they're going to help the company grow.
No matter how long you've been in business, finding great people to come work with you can be a challenge. And it's especially hard if you're a startup. The interview process alone is time consuming, sifting through resumes and scheduling maybe 1 or 2 rounds of interviews, only to have that hire not work out. Boy, can I relate to that. It's necessary work if you're at all interested in growing your business and transitioning the workload to others so you can focus on the important part of your business, and that's marketing, generating clients. Well, today, my guest shares his passion for helping startups recruit and keep the best talent. But before we get into all that, I just want to remind you, if you're interested in raising your standards as a father, a husband, and an entrepreneur, then I encourage you to participate in our Hero's Quest, and actually your Hero's Quest. In this 90-day program, you're going to accomplish more, develop more, and become more than you ever have in the last 12 months of your life. Now, we can get more information for this stuff at the Awakened Man Training Academy at members.theawakenedman.net. And with that, let's get on with today's episode.
The average man today is sleepwalking through life. Many never reaching their true potential, let alone ever crossing the finish line to living a purposeful life. Yet, the hunger still exists, albeit buried amidst his cluttered mind, misguided beliefs, and values that no longer serve him. It's time to align yourself for greatness. It's time to become a revolutionary man. Stay strong, my brother.
Welcome, everyone, to the Revolutionary Man podcast. I'm the founder of the Awakened Man movement and your host, Alan DeMonso. So let me ask you a question. Have you ever conducted an interview and thought, wow, this person's going to be great, only to find out they weren't at all like their interview? I can remember that story all too often. And so what do we do to weed out the professional interviewer, as I call them, and find the real gems, the ones that help us move our business forward? Well, today we're going to find that out. Allow me to introduce my guest. Rick Girard is the founder and CEO of Stride Search firm, and he's extremely passionate about helping startup founders win the strongest hires to fuel unprecedented company growth. Now, Rick is also the author of Healing Career Wounds, and he's invented a systemized hiring operating system. And the solution for leaders is so that they can provide the strongest hires by blowing up what we considered best practices with a humanistic, events-driven, and non-biased, time-efficient experience. Man, wish I had that 20 years ago. When he's not running around, just looking after school with these gifted mutants, as Professor X, as he calls himself, he also hosts a higher power radio show and podcast. It's a weekly series on LinkedIn Live, and it serves business leaders as a resource to help solve their most difficult hiring challenges. He also competes in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, good thing we're on the podcast and not face-to-face, and has an affinity for any adrenaline-pumping activities such as surfing, snowboarding, rock climbing, and running with scissors. Oh my goodness. Welcome to the show, Rick. How are things, brother?
Doing well, man. How are you? You did a great. That's even a better introduction than I can do on my own.
We were just saying, getting on the show today, I just take a little time to creep the socials and everything. You're doing some phenomenal work, Rick. I got to say that this is just outstanding work. And I thought that's why it was important for us to be on the show, have you on the show today to talk about this. But the first question I ask all of my guests that are on the podcast is we all talk about being on a hero's quest, as I was saying in our intro. So tell us a little bit more about what inspired you in your life to live the life you're doing today, how that experience has shaped you into the man you are and the work that you're doing.
Oh man. So, I always like kind of joke around that like I fell into my career like, like Bugs Bunny did. I made a wrong turn at Albuquerque. But, I fell into something that I loved. And, I've gone through this roller coaster ride of getting really good and then what's next. And then, but it's something that kind of just stuck with me throughout my life up until now. And I've just had to kind of shift and reshift and kind of figure out what I was passionate about at each stage. That's kind of the thing that's kept me motivated. But I've also done a pretty good job, I think, of maintaining some sort of balance, both physical and mental balance. I think the two things that have kept me sane in my life, although my wife would probably argue with that, is having some sort of outlet, like physical outlet. And for me right now, it's Brazilian jiu-jitsu, or surfing or snowboarding. And then, actually a few years ago, I found meditation, and that was something that like really kind of kept me from going crazy.
Yeah.
Because, I'm an entrepreneur too. I didn't put it like, I don't put it out there yet, but we just launched a software company called Intertrue in November.
Nice.
And yeah, that's, now I'm a startup founder. I'm adding that to my tag of insanity. And, I think it was Peter Thiel that said, if you're running a startup, there's only it's like two emotions that you feel is excitement and terror. And it's been a constant, ride of that, which is,
Yeah.
it's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally feel you. We've been doing men's work here for just over 2 years. We started just before the pandemic, and it kind of waffled through that time. And so I totally can relate to it. And that's why I thought it was so great to have you come on the podcast today, because there isn't an entrepreneur out there that isn't struggling with something in their business
No.
as well as at home. And that's, I'm really grateful that you brought up about the, trying to maintaining that balance. And, and one of the things is that it's hard for us to do that. And I wrote an article about the myth of work-life balance, and I just wanted to get your take before we dive into the book and some other work. What's your take on what the idea of a work-life balance really means, especially as a startup business?
I think for me personally, just I only have so much mental capacity, like for me to focus in and do work before I start to go, so like I need something to break up those sprints. The way I operate best is that I operate in short sprints where like I can focus, get a bunch of work done, and then I need to step away and go do something else. I don't function well where I have to sit and like just focus on one thing for a long amount of time, which is why I never went into accounting or something like that. Right. Like,
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just been, for me, the one thing that's made the huge difference in my life, at least, just understanding the way that I operate best, and then playing within that realm.
And I really like that. I like that answer because, you're tying into, you understand what your makeup is and how you best function in work. And so I think for guys, and we get into careers, and maybe they were aspirative, I guess, if that's the right word. I don't know. When we were young, that's what I want to do. I know for me, I wanted to be a chef years ago. Like, I'm in my mid 50s. So being a chef back then, it was the Galloping Gourmet who was on TV, Graham Kerr. There wasn't food TV. There was no Bobby Flay. There was no Iron Chef. It wasn't cool. It wasn't sexy to be a chef, but I really wanted to do that. And that carried me for the longest time. And then finally as my career moved on, I just found I just lost the lack of that energy and zeal for it. And so it's great that we find that piece that we step into, that we understand how it works for us and how we work. And so being as many years as I was in hospitality, I'm a multitasker, but I recognize that what makes sense in the kitchen doesn't make sense in business very much when you're partially doing things and you're all over the place, right? It tends to leave lots of loose ends, but I really like that point.
Yeah, I've never been, I used to pride myself in being a multitasker, and then I realized that I'm really not.
Yeah, exactly.
I was hoping I was, but it was me fooling myself, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I hear you. So what inspired you to write this book? The book's called Healing Career Wounds. What
Yeah.
inspired you to write that, and how'd that all come to be?
Well, it's something that I had thought of for quite some time. I've spent the better part of the last 10 years developing a methodology by which, like one of the things that drives me is that I'm a terrible loser. Like I do not in my search business like to lose. And so, in doing search work, a lot of times, it's a lot of the way most people operate is it's about throwing as much shit at a wall and hoping something sticks, and you're just setting up lots of interviews. And at some point in my life, I just decided that wasn't good enough anymore. Like I needed to become better to where I could send in less people and get more people hired. So one of the things that I realized was that one of my big choke points was when I set somebody who I recruited in for an interview, who I knew was good, the person would get in front of somebody else who, I didn't know their skills or how much experience they had in doing these sort of like interviewing and those sort of things. And basically what I learned was, hey, look at people interview based off three things: assumptions, bias, and personal motives. And those are how they make decisions, and there's no evidence behind any of it. So what ends up happening, and the light bulb moment for me was when I was working a VP search for a software company, and I sent a guy in for an interview, met with the CEO, and I asked the CEO how it went. He said, "Oh my God, this guy's amazing. We want to hire him." What'd you guys talk about? Walk me through the interview. Oh, well, we talked for about 45 minutes about the Oakland A's. It's my favorite baseball team. It's his favorite baseball team. So he wanted to make a decision to hire somebody based on the fact that they had a commonality. And I was like, well, how do you know the person's even good? How do you know he's going to work well with your organization? And he didn't really care. He's like, you know what? I think he's going to do great. He came out of X, Y, and the assumptions part kicked in. He came out of XYZ company. I mean, obviously he's going to do well here. And I'm like, man, I think I've got other people that are probably stronger. And, he moved forward, made the person an offer. 6 months later, he didn't work out. And when that happened, who gets blamed for it?
Yeah.
This guy, right? So I really started to hedge my bets. And what I started to do was say, hey, I'll do searches for you, but this is how we operate. We actually put an interview process in place. And so we just started building in an interview process and coaching people and making sure that they were extracting the right data before they made a decision. And then that all culminated into the book, which is now culminating into the InterTrue platform that I mentioned earlier. So we figured out ways in which we can get AI to assist and help drive the interview process with the human.
Outstanding. And so that's perfect. I made a couple of notes here. You'll see, I'll do this lots of our interviews. So I'm listening to, if you see my head pointed down. You talked about on the interviewer side, we're interviewing based on assumption, bias, personal motive, I think you said.
Yep.
And so really in coming up with this strategy, this business model and your software, is the problem then what you're doing is removing that aspect out of it? And is that how you're guiding entrepreneurs through? Or what's the core issue that you're trying to resolve for entrepreneurs?
Yeah, we're trying to minimize. I mean, you can't fully eliminate it, but you can do a really, really good job of combating it, right? Because, people do have, assumptions and, bias that they make. But what we do is we've designed the questions in such a way where we use behavioral interview questions. We front load those against the core values of the company first, and then the skills second. So we want to do is we want to understand. One of the other things I realized was that when people align with core values of the company, they flourish, they do well. And then I get praised because it was the best person they ever hired. So, I mean, purely selfish motives are why I came up with this. But, I just started seeing results that were working and everybody's happy, including the person who took the job there, because they're in a place where they're going to do well. So that's kind of what drove me to continue this journey.
Man, that makes so much sense, Rick. When I think about that, all the work we do here at the Awakened Man is we really focus on helping guys understand their core values, and when we get a sense, we understand what our big core values are, then we can shape and craft our life purpose, mission statement, or our creed for our MO. We know how we're going to move forward and why. And that's a business idea, but it makes sense in our personal life. And so it's not surprising for me to hear that both the interviewer and the interviewee, that it's successful because they're speaking the same language ultimately. Right?
Yeah.
They and if there's ever a shortfall with a recruit or the recruitment, I think you nailed it right on the head. It will be that values misalignment.
Yeah.
And sometimes for companies, and the other thing I've experienced in doing men's work is that what we say is as a value, but what our actions and how we actually operate in the culture it may be different. Not always, but sometimes it's different. Like I may say that I value health, but it's a real struggle for me when I think about I get snack time about 9 p.m. and I like saltiness. So it's about reminding me of, okay, well, I said I value that I'm healthy, especially as I'm getting older here, and taking care of what I'm consuming, but are my actions matching my core values? So are you finding that when you're doing this work with companies and you're doing the core values, are they aligning with that in what their culture is like, or how do you make sure that those two are the same?
Yeah. So that's a really good point, because a lot of the work that we end up doing is people have core values, and they're usually something they pulled out of a book, or they're aspirational, right? And the thing is that, the core values stem from the CEO of the company, from the leadership, and it's how they operate. It's not what we want it to be. It's how we operate, so the values are the thing that drives culture. These are the things that really give people an accurate picture of what it's like on a day-to-day basis and how they make decisions, right? So yeah, you know what? We do a lot of work with executives, and we test it.
Yeah.
Really. So, when somebody has a value like integrity, which, Enron's number one value was integrity, by the way. So, when they have those, like, you've got to put language around what they mean, right? Or how you would measure it. So if somebody says, hey, look at, I'm living this value of, like one of our values is dig deeper, right? And so we're really big in listening to understand, not to respond. Like that's one of the pieces of of how we operate. So it's defensible, and I can actually have a conversation with somebody about that and understand how well they understand, and whether or not they operate the same way that we do as an organization.
Right on. That's perfect. Yeah. That makes so much sense, right? Is using that testing model just to make sure that alignment's there. Now, getting back to your book, in your book, you talk about there's 3 pillars, and you use it interchangeably throughout the book, and you walk us through it. Tell us a little bit about what each of those pillars are and how how you're using that model as a framework for this work.
Yeah. So it links back to, the title is kind of, you kind of think, well, okay, if I'm looking for a job, I want to figure out how to heal my career wounds, but that's actually the punchline. The title is, this is how you attract really strong players to your company. If you can demonstrate how you can provide value to them before like a paycheck, you can land superior talent, right? Because most people go through interviews, and what they do is they end up at the end of the day comparing offer to offer, and it's based on benefits and money, but there's no value that's built into it for the most part. So if you can demonstrate that, and you don't need to come up with a big, huge offer, because you're giving something to that person they want. It's more important than the money.
Yeah. That makes total sense. Right on.
Yep.
That to me sounds like, man, that's got to be a ton more work than working with a built-in company. And then on the other hand, I was sitting there going, well, but there isn't anything ingrained. There's no culture that really truly has been set in. So tell me your reasoning for why startups was your passion, and why you decided to pick that as a niche.
You know what? I just like startup people much better than corporate. I mean, and here's the thing, like, there's a lot of people that chase enterprises. I'm just not an enterprise guy. And, like, it's like trying to turn the Titanic is not something that I'm going to be able to do. I'd much rather be on a small boat, trying to jump the wake of the Titanic rather than trying to steer the Titanic. Like it, startups are exciting. Actually, we go after SMBs, small and medium-sized businesses. Mm-hmm. That's kind of our target. My passions for startups, because I've been around startups my whole career. I've helped build a lot of tech startups in the Silicon Valley over my career. And it's just exciting and it's just fun, and you get to learn about all these cool things that people, cool problems that people are trying to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much energy and passion there, right? Like, yeah. And like you were saying earlier, right? You've got the two sides of that coin, right? There's excitement, and then there's just running shit scared some days because there's just stuff to do. And you've invested probably everything you have to make this thing go because it's your passion. And they just seem to be more open to at least hearing things and working on it. So tell me, why is it important that the interview process needs to be so worked on for these startups? Because it sounds like to that probably that's one of the things. Yeah, we have to hire people, but it may not be one of their top priorities or the thing that they figured out. So why do you think that's so important for them? We've already talked about hiring really good people, but let's go a little bit deeper than just about finding the good person.
Well, here's the thing: if you don't hire the right people, you fail. Like it's the thing that'll kill your company all day long. I think if you really think about why companies fail, is because they put the wrong people on the bus. And that might even include the founder, but I mean, the companies that succeed surround themselves with the right people. So it's really a question of whether or not you want to fail or not. Again, I told you I'm like a terrible loser and I just don't want to fail. So I've spent a lot of time like talking to people and like really making sure that the people I bring on board in my company are the right people, are the strongest people that I can get. Yeah. And that has to do with whether or not the person's positioned right for the organization. Do they want what I offer? Right. I also talk about builders, improvers, and maintainers. If you're a startup or a smaller company, you need builders. And guess what? There's not a whole lot of builders out there. Most people are usually on the maintainer side of things. And one of the biggest mistakes I've seen throughout my career is that you get people that are enamored with, hey, we found this person out of Facebook or Google or some big company, and we're super excited. We're going to hire them. And then 6 months later, you ask them like, oh yeah, that guy didn't work out. I'm like, he wasn't positioned, bro. Like you recruited him to come to a startup. Probably not the right person for a startup. So how'd that experiment go for you? Not so good, right? And the other thing is, if you've got a lot of money coming in, I just think it's irresponsible for the business to burn through a whole bunch of capital just chasing somebody who's going to feed your ego.
Oh yeah, I'm just thinking back to a good friend of mine who, when in the early days of his business and trying to hire and, going through recruiting firms and, doing it on his own. And it just seemed like it was perpetual, challenge. Oh, this is the greatest employee. And then, like you said, 6 months to a year later, then everything falls off the wagon. And I never considered, I really like how you position this. There's, depending on where season your business is in, or you need builders, improvers, and maintainers. So what would be a core characteristic of each of those profiles?
Well, builders are what's interesting is that when you talk to builders, that's what they talk about. Like, I want to build something from scratch. Give me a blank sheet of paper and let me go. Right. And again, there's not a whole lot of people that are wired that way. Like, give me a bunch of Lego bricks and I'll build like, so the Eiffel Tower or something like that. Right. Like, so there's people who love that and that's where they flourish. Then there's like the next class up is that there's a lot of people who like to take something that's already there and make it better. Right. And that's a pretty important role for people once your company is a little bit more established, right? Because you want to make sure that like, your sales are okay, but you want somebody who can take it to the next level, right? Yeah. Those are the level uppers, right? And then you have maintainers, and maintainers to me, they're necessary for a business, but they're most of the people that are out there that really have a job, and they're there, they do good work, but they're not necessarily there like in the capacity that you need them to be, especially for a startup.
Yeah.
And I think that's where startups get in trouble. A lot of times somebody might get laid off from a company, and this is no ditch on people who get laid off, right? But if you get laid off from an organization, you really have to think about where you want to be and then go after those types of companies. I think it's somewhat irresponsible to just take a job for a paycheck, and I think that's what ends up happening a lot of times. Well, I'll just take this job until I find what I'm really looking for.
Yeah, so true. And it's because it's a stepping stone, right? And they're just, for whatever reason, they need to pay bills, they need to get in there. And then we get, as the entrepreneur side of it, we get that's where we go back to our assumptions and biases and personal motives, right? And we think that, wow, look at this resume, look where they came from. They came from, a Fortune 100 company. Maybe I should hire this person, or whatever that company looks like in your neck of the woods. There might not be a Fortune 100 or 500 even. But the point of the matter is that, what I'm hearing a lot of, and I catch myself in this is I'm constantly in a recruiting mode of one way or another. And this is, we tend to fall on, at least I do, on this affinity side, right? And it's the things, they sound like me, they talk to me. And that's why I referenced a professional interviewer, right? There's some people who are really good at interviewing.
Oh yeah.
They're going, man, I can't.
You have to ask yourself why people are good at interviewing too, because some of the best people I've ever come across are terrible at interviewing. Like, it's not a natural, like, it's not comfortable. It's like going to the dentist and getting your teeth extracted for most people, right? But the people that are good at interviewing, why are they good at interviewing? Because they get lots of practice. They've been doing it a lot, right? And that's not necessarily a good thing. And I've heard the flip side of the coin too, where, hey, this guy knocked the cover off the ball interviewing, so we went with this person, and then when they start, it ends up being a dud, and because you didn't dig deep enough, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what I really like about what you're doing with this higher operating system, because I think it helps take the personality out of it and provide some, you talked about some real data. And so it's touch points. So it sounds like there's lots of work in the front end, especially with the company you're working with, to help them get clear on exactly what they need in order for them to move their business forward by getting the right people on the bus, and not just on the right people on the bus, but in the right seat, doing the right work.
Yeah.
And so as you're hiring people, how is your follow-up process? How does that look for folks that come in and do work with you?
What do you mean by follow-up process?
Yeah. So you hire, I ask you, you and I are working together, you help me hire somebody. Is the program you've developed more of a, like, you're not doing the interviews. You're just helping the startup be able to do that on their own so they can hire good people. And if that's the case, then you're not really necessarily involved. You're not working as a recruiting firm. You're working as more of a teaching company, from what I'm understanding.
Yes, somewhat. It's funny because we still do search work. I mean, I don't know if I'll ever get that out of my I enjoy doing it. It's just kind of fun. For some reason, I feel like a little chemist where I can go make a match. And it was funny because I placed somebody, it was a few months ago, and it was super fun search. And then the person who hired the person said, well, I'm looking for a mate. Do you think you can help me find a mate? And I'm like, no, I want nothing to do with that, because I know who you're gonna get mad at when it doesn't work out. It's gonna be me. But yeah, so what we do is we have all the structure there. We help people to do we usually do the discovery call, then we hand them off to the company. The company does a value alignment interview. Then they do the skills piece, the skills interview, which call that a working session.
Yeah.
And then finally, the final interview, we kind of 3-step out the interview process. Nice. You can get such good data in those 3 steps that you can make accurate decisions. We have a lot of clients that are operating in the 90th percentile.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Wow. That's a great success rate, because I would suggest that the success rate for hiring people is probably the not much higher than the divorce rate. It's like
I've heard it's like 49% if you don't have like an interview process and a bunch of other stuff. So you almost have a better chance of like just walking in, flipping a coin, heads you're hired, tails you're not. Like,
Wow.
you know,
Yeah, I'm not surprised
you
because
save
it's so
yourself a lot of time
complicated.
that way too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's time and money, right? And I think we touched on that earlier. We talked about we as entrepreneurs, as startups, we may not recognize the cost of that recruitment, and that's why it's important that this work that you're doing is taking so much of the process. It's just you've just spelled it out for entrepreneurs and startups that they can take the personal piece out of it and really do some analytical work, because that's what they would do in their business anyways. They wouldn't make decisions, at least I would think, not so much on emotion, although that may play they're doing a gut check, but it's more likely a last check, not a first check. And so it's so important that you're doing this.
Yeah, hiring people, it's funny because one of the things that I feel, and I feel myself getting in this mode too, is where you just want to get the thing filled. Like you just want somebody to come in and do the work. And you really have to pull yourself back and say, like if it's not a hell yes, then it's a no. Like there should be no doubt in your mind that this person's the right person. And it should be no doubt in your mind that this person's the right person because of X, Y, and Z. Like you should have data behind it to back that.
Absolutely.
And it's not just because I like this person and I think they're going to do great here. And, he likes baseball. I like baseball.
Yeah. Yeah, listen, that's and unfortunately, a lot of us make that kind of a decision, right? I mentioned about the affinity side of it. Listen, through all this work that you've been doing, though, what's been the best piece of advice that you've received from someone as you've been doing this work?
Oh gosh, well, so I'm a new startup founder doing a software product, and I've built a really strong base of advisors. And gosh, like just some of the best advice is just like, deploy fast and then iterate. And, like one of the first things that was recommended to me was read that book, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. And yeah, there's just so many good nuggets. I feel like I get good nuggets on a daily basis, almost too much good advice.
Yeah.
To where I can't make a decision sometimes.
Yeah. Oh man. I hear
but
you.
I think that the two bit, I actually got a piece of advice from Gino Wickman. I had him on my show a few months ago, and he wrote the foreword for my book. And Gino's like, you got to say no. You have to say no more, Yeah. So if it's not as part of your one thing that you need to accomplish, then say no.
Yep. 100%. Well, and when that request is measured up against our values, then it helps us get to that no. Because when we're not solid on what our values are, and does this move me forward? And it might move you forward, but today, in this moment, is it the best piece? And learning how to say no is so true.
Yeah.
You're doing all this work, right? And so I want to go a bit back and dive a little bit more into a personal question here. But you've married, you got work to do, doing the startup. Tell me a little bit about what legacy means for you.
Yeah, it's funny because I've been thinking a lot about that, like over the past couple of years, is that, because I did this reverse thing where I built up a company, I sold it, and I spent a good part of my like 30s and early 40s, like living in Hawaii, surfing a bunch. And I think I came to the realization that like I really wasn't making an impact on the world. And the legacy for me is that if I can do something to change the way in which people get into roles that they're going to do well in, and companies can hire the people that they're going to help the company grow, then that's what I was put here to do.
Right on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
And it's not about me. It's about, it's about the entrepreneurs being successful. Right on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love asking that question. I've only started doing that lately with my interviews, and it's always interesting to get a sense of where people come from, and it doesn't necessarily need to be about you. It's about living your calling, right?
Yeah.
And how that ties into what you're doing, because it plays such an important role in who we are as men and in living our lives. And so just grateful for that answer. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Of everything that we've spoken about today, and maybe there was something we didn't get a chance to touch on, if there was one takeaway you'd like our audience to remember, what would that be?
Like the one takeaway would be if you're an entrepreneur, if you're building a company, if you're doing any hiring, I would say, look, two things need to happen. Number one, if you're the person who's running your company, you need to be the best person as far as hiring goes in your company. Like, you need to be the person leading it. Because if you're the best interviewer, then it'll trickle down. Like, other people will follow suit and they'll become a really strong interview. And the interview is the one place where two people go into a room together and then somebody comes out with a decision. There's no visibility and you have no idea what happened. So it's really hard for you to trust your people. So give them the tools, give them the resources, give them a framework, give them a process, give them the questions so that they can be successful.
Love that. Just love it. And you've provided that. So it's just great work that you're doing here. So I just want to say once again, thank you so much, Rick, for spending time with me today. And we've given our entrepreneurs that it doesn't matter what length of business you've been in, whether you're really a brand new startup or you're in your first couple of years, you've helped us understand why the importance of having a hiring operating system. And by following your program, they can do that. And so in speaking of your program, what would be the best way for men to get a hold of you so they can plug into the work you're doing and participate in any of your programs?
Yeah, so the best way to reach me via email is rick@stride, STRIDE, search, SEARCH.com. You can also check out Intertru, it's INTERTRU.ai. You can catch me on my podcast. That's Higher Power Radio. It's HIRE, Power, POWER, Radio, RADIO. So it's not a religious show, obviously. It's about hiring. And that's where you can get me.
Right on. I'll make sure all that information's in the show notes for today's episode so folks can get out there. And I encourage you to do that. If you're an entrepreneur, a startup, and you're looking for help, it's important to grow your business and by putting the right people, getting the right people on the bus and then getting them in the right seats. And I know doing this work with Rick is going to get you there. So once again, my friend, thank you so much for being on the show.
That's a pleasure. Thank you for having me, brother.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.